Hi, everyone. I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm here with filmmaker James Adolphus, the director of the new HBO documentary film Being Mary Tyler Moore that premieres May 26th on HBO and Max. James, I find this sort of unbelievable, but I read that before you started working on this Mary doc, you had never seen a single episode of either the Dick Van Dyke Show or the Mary Tyler Moore Show and had never seen Ordinary People. How is that even possible?
Ray, um, I'm embarrassed by the question, and I get the question over and over again. But that's the truth. The truth is, I had never seen a single episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show or the Dick Van Dyke Show. And between undergrad and graduate film school, I had never watched Ordinary People. I grew up in a house full of reruns. My mom, you know, loved television. We loved Nick at Night. But for some reason, Mary wasn't a part of our life. And even though Mary meant a tremendous amount to my mother, well, it would be decades before Mary would mean a tremendous amount to me, but she does now.
Yeah, no, I understand. You didn't grow up watching her. You weren't a fan, but it's clear you grew to become one just from what I saw on the I saw in your film.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the reasons I was selected for this project that Lena Waithe and Deborah Martin Chase and Mary's widowed husband, Dr. Robert Levine, chose me for this project was because I was not a fan. They they hoped that through thorough research and time that of course I would become a fan of Mary. It would be impossible to not be a fan, but they wanted someone that would lead with an objective lens. And when you're a super fan, it's really hard to lead with an objective lens. And I offered that to this project. I didn't even attempt to dive into Mary's body of work until I had read her autobiography two or three times. I wanted to really make sure that I understood the woman. And then, even then, I dove into research about what life was like for women in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, because I wanted to understand the world that Mary was going to navigate before sitting down and enjoying the content that she made. But it offered a very unique and nuanced lens on her body of work, having had that information ingested first.
I think it's kind of wonderful, actually, that someone who is on the surface so unlikely, Black and Puerto Rican, no experience watching the subject, would get involved in the doc. And you're right, it does. If you're a super crazy fan, that would certainly color your lens in being able to be objective. I'd heard that Robert Levine, Mary's widower, was being very picky about whom he entrusted to the story. Um, but he came around to granting the rights and archives and handing over the keys to the kingdom to Lena Waithe. Um, Also, an unlikely candidate for this job as a Black and queer woman from the South Side of Chicago. It's just really kind of wonderful to have the two of you involved in this.
Right. I agree completely. I mean, Deborah Martin Chase, also a Black woman who's a part of this project, has often said on stage as we've presented this film that, Lena Waithe, Deborah Martin Chase, and James Adolphus, the trio, we are a very unlikely pair. But that speaks volumes to how universal Mary's life and legacy is. Mary doesn't just speak to one type of human being. Mary doesn't just speak to white women. Mary speaks to all women. Mary speaks to men. Mary speaks to multiple communities that make up both men and women and everything in between. Mary's story is universal, and not just in the performances of the iconic performances that we know of when we think about Mary Tyler Moore, but also just in her personal life. And Mary is a real human being, and that person is very easy to relate to.
Yeah, we all grew up thinking, well, this is America's sweetheart, and she had this perfect life. And clearly, by the end of the doc, we see that she was troubled. And she had her issues. And if we look really deep into her eyes, we could see that there were issues there just from on this, and it was really on the surface if you paid attention.
Right. I think it must have been so incredibly difficult to be a Mary Tyler Moore. Everyone wanted to be Mary Tyler Moore, and I think, on so many levels, like there's like the it's aspirational to want to be inspired by some of the characters that Mary played. It is the that Mary Richards was able to inspire an entire generation of women to dream outside the box is amazing. But at the same time, Mary was known as the woman with the eternal smile. That meant Mary, as a forward presenting person, in the spotlight, always had to arrive and offer only that one version of herself. And how difficult, what that seems like such an unbearable burden at times to have to walk through the world with, with guards up at all times, never allowing anyone in. I often think that we expect too much from our heroes, and that we should be a little more understanding, and certainly a lot more forgiving of who they truly are, because, not just from having bad days, but we're all weak, we all suffer. We all are looking for and trying to hold on to family.
And
Just
it's, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Nope, you're fine.
No, I was going to say, it's no surprise that she would have issues with alcohol. Everyone looked at her walking through life as Mary Richards and Laura Petrie, and she was, instead of flesh and blood human being, Mary Tyler Moore, and having to always pretend possibly to be something she wasn't. Um, but you based the film on her autobiography, did you not? And what did you find in that book? You mentioned it a little bit earlier here, that gave you inspiration, and you felt a certain kinship with her after reading it.
I did. I felt a deep kinship to Mary when I read her book, because I understood that Mary, like my mom, is a woman of a certain generation. They that have suffered tremendously, but refuse to acknowledge their pain or certainly let anyone in. But in Mary's book, she led with it. Mary wanted the world to know from the very beginning of going on this journey with her, within the pages of her story, that she wasn't the woman you thought. That Mary's, father was controlling. Her mom was an alcoholic. Mary was sexually assaulted when she was 6 years old by a neighbor. Mary put all of that out front in her book, and she started with that. And, those acknowledgments go against the idea that we have of who Mary was. But I think Mary wanted folks to know that if you're going to go on this journey with her, then you have to accept who she truly was and what she truly held on to. The pain and trauma and insecurity of her life mirrors so much of what we all experience in our own personal lives. That Mary was brave enough to lead with her vulnerability, I wanted to protect in the film, because I saw that bravery as strength. And we live in a society where often, when we talk about our pain and our suffering and what makes us human, what makes us vulnerable, is seen and treated as weakness. But I disagree vehemently with that, and it's why we did our best where we could in the film to explore and portray and explain, parts of Mary's personal life that was otherwise, unseen and unknown. Mary took some of the guards down in her book, and where we could express that, we try to in the film.
I certainly didn't know that she'd been sexually abused as a child. And I know you don't really get into that in the film, because I guess she never spoke about it. So, and since you have her narrating her own story, you had to steer clear of that.
That's correct. It was really important to me that we try to find a way to acknowledge it, but based on the creative approach, and because Mary never left an audiobook, we didn't have a way to include it in the film. And, I think this says a lot about who Mary was. Like, she didn't just present to the world, to her fans, a woman with the eternal smile. She did that to her friends. Mary never talked about her sexual assault, even with her closest friends. She wanted to protect her friends from her inner demons too. And it was almost as if, Mary wanted everyone to feel like they were the center of attention, and not her. But I think that came at a heavy cost. And I think it's a shame that Mary never had anyone in her life to lean on, especially with something as traumatic as being sexually assaulted when she was a child. Because, in her book, it's a really pivotal moment. She was assaulted by a neighbor, and and told her parents straight away what happened. But her parents, their response to her, which is a response to so many sexual assault survivors, was, it didn't happen. And that's in chapter 3 of the book. Mary says that of all of the things that could be said in someone's life that carry with you, that stay with you for forever, she says, there are some sentiments that always stay with you forever. You got the part, you're married, and it didn't happen, and she says that, and her mother's denial, she hurt her more than her abuser. And that, when you look at a woman who is sometimes considered the ice princess, there's an actual reason for that, and it's the beauty of documentary films that allow folks later on to go in and to re-examine someone's life, to offer nuance that explains why Mary behaved this way in public. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to do that, to offer that for her fans.
It absolutely does explain a lot, James. And, I wondered what surprised you the most from your research. I'll tell you what surprised me, that she was so hamstrung by the male patriarchy throughout her career. I guess that shouldn't have surprised me, because that was the era. But it seemed like she was always fighting that uphill battle, which you showed at the very beginning in that, in the interview with the talk show host, which which now, knowing what we know today, just draws incredible anger and frustration, seeing that was his point of view, David Susskind. That's why you led with it, I'm sure.
It is why I led with that. I mean, Mary against the patriarchy is something, as a Black and Puerto Rican dude, I understand really well. And I thought it was the most appropriate lens to lead with in this film. And I also agree that I think documentary filmmakers should always bring a point of view into their storytelling. I did want to tell Mary Tyler Moore's story. I also wanted to tell the story of all women and all folks who are marginalized and who have to, push back against glass ceilings. And Mary's story is my story. And even though, it's acknowledged, and Mary does acknowledge that for so much of her life, she had to rely on a man for something. Her first marriage, a man just to get out of the house. Her second marriage to Grant, although they shared a great love, it was also a very convenient marriage, very strategic marriage. In that marriage, she was able to build a business that allowed her to be, for the rest of her life, independent financially. And I think, there is a point of view where you look back on Mary's life and you go, well, she had to depend on a man. But I also think there's a lot of power in how strategic Mary was, and in that dependence. I think there was, I recognize that as someone who was, given, a set of cards, and she played her hand brilliantly. She could have, of course, rejected her lot in life and rejected the idea that she would have to lean on someone or in order to get ahead. But we all do, and yeah, I don't think Mary ever wanted pity. There's one thing we certainly didn't want to bring as storytellers to Mary's life, is to look back on any aspect of her life with pity. Mary wasn't asking for that. I think the patriarchy itself has to go up against itself. Who wants to be a victim of the patriarchy? Nobody. And but so what? Okay, so we all are. And what are you going to do with your lot in life? And I think what Mary did with her situation speaks volumes to her tenacity. I think it's therein lies so many reasons why she continues to be an inspiration and an icon.
Absolutely. You also make an interesting choice, I think, James, by featuring only audio um, in your interviews, well, of both Mary and then in your interviews with subjects like James L. Brooks and Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Dick Van Dyke. What made you decide to keep the faces off screen and just have the audio?
Ray, the honest truth is that inspiration came from Lena Waithe. There was a dearth of Mary Tyler Moore behind the scenes footage. We had access to all the episodes of all of her shows and her cinematic appearances. But we were 8 months into a 10-month edit before we stumbled across what we call the lost tapes, where we were able to locate footage of Mary at a bridal shower and Mary with her blue-eyed horse, Mary with her brother. For a very long time, we had to figure out other creative ways to express parts of Mary's life that existed in her book. And Mariah Remmett, the film's brilliant editor, she and I spent months and months experimenting with archival. And we were using films pre-1950 as metaphors for Mary's life. And we were having a lot of fun with it. And, when we got to the first rough cut and screened that with Lena Waithe, she responded mostly, most powerfully to these creative moments in archive. And in those moments lived a tremendous amount of magic. And, Lena was great. She was like, I understand why doc filmmakers do that step back thing where you step back and you cut to the interview and you give us context. She said, but I don't need context. I know what the second wave was. Then if our audience doesn't know what second wave feminism was when the film ends, they can look that up. But when we are in the archive, this is just magic. And, at that point as well, it's not just Lena, the brilliant filmmaker, but also Lena, the super fan. And she's like, I want more of Mary. And this is a film where you intend to give Mary the first and last word. So let's just move away from this convention. Let's live in the archive and find every single conceivable piece of Mary Tyler Moore we can source and include that in the film. Because the fact is, this is probably going to be the only Mary Tyler Moore film for a while. And why not give the audience as much of Mary as we possibly can? So we did. And that was all Lena Waithe.
Yeah. What kind of a response did you get to the film at South by Southwest when it premiered, James? I actually think it's just, you do a terrific job. It's deep and revealing and powerful at points. And I love the fact that you take a point of view. I mean, I really feel like it's surprising. And I thought I knew this woman incredibly well. And you bring so much new and provocative to the subject of her.
Ray, I have to tell you that touring with Mary from South by Southwest and all the regional festivals I've done in between, the last 6 or 7 weeks have been a joy. We spend 10 months editing the film in a room at max with 5 people, and you get to South by Southwest and there are 350 people in the space, or at Cleveland, there were, nearly 1,000 people in the audience. And to listen to the audience have the same reaction to the same scenes night after night after night is really powerful. This film has been really well received. And just a couple days ago, Deborah Martin Chase, Dr. Robert Levine, and Mariah Remmett and I were in Newport, New York for a private screening of the film. And, one of the last comments during the Q&A was a gentleman. He was all the way in the back of the theater. And he said to us, I've been a life fan of Mary Tyler Moore. I grew up watching the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and I know every single episode. And, when I was watching your film, I was really disappointed that you didn't spend more time covering the Dick Van Dyke Show and you didn't spend enough time covering the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And instead, you spent all of this time offering a version of Mary I had no access to, and now that the film is done, I really feel like Mary Tyler Moore is my friend, that I can call Mary my friend. And he took us on the whole journey. In his response, we were terrified that we had totally messed up, but I loved that sentiment, that he is a super fan and assumed that he would go down memory lane and get to just watch the film that showered praise on all of her greatest performances. And we, of course, we thought about making that film, but that film offered so much less time for point of view, and we really wanted to spend much more time owning our own point of view of who we thought Mary was.
It's certainly about much more than her just turning the world on with her smile. um, I think we're out of time, actually. James, your terrific documentary, Being Mary Tyler Moore, premieres over HBO and its streaming counterpart, Max, on May 26th. Good luck this Emmy season, sir. And thanks for visiting with us at Gold Derby.
Ray, thanks for having me. It's been really fun to spend time with you and with you here at Gold Derby.